and what this can achieve. Most commonly is the perception that the law was meant to deter people from attempting suicide and conflicting this decriminalization with legalization of suicide. So as an association, we felt that whilst this is still a topic in conversation in mainstream media and social media, it was important for us to ride on this and provide some forum where we can listen to the experts and then get some information and education on why it was necessary to decriminalize suicide attempts and what this will achieve for us. So that's the purpose of why we are gathering here today. This is going to be a series. This is the first one. And today's program is entitled Freedom to Live, Not Freedom to Die. To moderate this session is Dr. John Paul Omogine. He is a psychiatrist at the Confanochi Teaching Hospital and a fellow of the West African College of Physicians Psychiatry Faculty. So I will hand over the baton to Dr. Omogine to introduce our first speaker and then moderate the rest of the program. Thank you and do enjoy your day. During the course of the presentation, we will share a link, Google link, where you can enter your MDC number for points to be awarded later. Thank you very much.
Dr. John Paul, you can take it.
On mute. Okay, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Very happy to be here. My name is Dr. John Paul Omogine, as I've been duly introduced, and I'm a psychiatrist at Confanochi Teaching Hospital. And I'm excited that we have this opportunity to share information about suicide and the implications of this repeal, the decriminalization, and what's the point behind all of this? Why are we even bothered about people who try to take their own lives? Why should we all be concerned? And we'll learn as well about what we can do. I'm joined here today by 4 incredible speakers. I will introduce each of them at length when it's time for them to speak. But then they are in the people of Faculty CSA, Dr. Ruth Olusoyinchi, Dr. Delali Fiagbe, Favor Hilda Brown. And I'm hopeful and confident, in fact, that we will learn so much from these people. Our first speaker for today is going to be none other than Dr. Delali Fiagbe. I hope he's on. Yeah, I can see that he's on. Dr. Fiagbe is the head of psychiatry at Kolebu Teaching Hospital, University of Ghana. He's a senior lecturer there. He's also somebody from whom I have learned a lot. He's a very resourceful person and avid musician. He plays the keyboard like Mozart and the rest. He's a neuropsychiatrist actually as well, with certificates in electroencephalography and neuroimaging. And he holds a certificate in the neuropsychology of schizophrenia and depression. So I'm very, very confident that we're going to learn a lot today about the neurobiological basis of suicide, to help us understand that this isn't something that just happens. It's not just people choosing to act this way. It's not a default or a deficit in their character, but there's a neurobiological basis for this. So Dr. Fiagbe, over to you.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes, you are loud and clear.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm so grateful to God for this opportunity. I thank the organizers of this program. I believe that is timely and it will definitely save a life because we know matters concerning suicide are life and death issues. So I will proceed to have this conversation this afternoon on the neurobiological basis of suicide. So just by way of intro, suicide is a major public health issue and it constitutes a significant cause of death worldwide. This information is from the WHO. More than 700,000 people die due to suicide every year. And for every suicide, there are many more people who attempt suicide. A prior suicide is obviously an important risk factor for suicide for the general public. And the narrative in our context is probably not different. I learned from Professor Akwesio said that for each one that is reported, you have like 4 that go unreported. And I'm sure he will dilate on that statement when it's his turn. Suicide is the 4th leading cause of death among 15 to 29 years old individuals. So our youth are not spared for losing people of this caliber. Then our future may as well be bleak. So it's a very important issue that we need to take critical look at. But 77% of global suicide occur in low and middle income country. There's a scripture that says the destruction of the poor is their poverty. So poverty is a very important socio-economic factor for all individuals and all psychological disorders, and this is no different. And most of the methods that people use include injection of pesticide, hanging, firearms among the most common methods which are used globally. So we need to note that the substrate for suicide is the brain, or the substrate for any psychological or psychiatric disorder for that matter is the brain. So it is important for us to know what constitutes the brain and how that connects to the behaviors, suicide behaviors that people demonstrate. In fact, in our formulation of our patients, you always ask if you think the problem you're having is from your brain or is from your leg or wherever, or it's just a belief. We always want to find out whether that is clearly established, because without that, it might be difficult for us to move ahead with our management. So the brain is a very important aspect of today's conversation. So generally there are 4 lobes of the brain that we consider. The frontal lobe, the one colored in red or peach. You know, we the gentlemen are colorblind, so this one looks like red to me. The one that follows this is the parietal lobe, and the turquoise down there represents the temporal lobe, and what you have in mauve or violet represents occipital lobe. So these are the broad divisions of the brain, and pretty soon we will find out where these suicidal behaviors and attempts originate from. So from the frontal lobe, there's another aspect of the frontal lobe which you call the prefrontal lobe. So the prefrontal lobe is where you have most of your executive functions, your thinking faculties, your ability to make decisions, your ability to inhibit behavior, your ability to arrive at conclusion, your judgment, your ability to abstract. Most of those things are subserved by the frontal lobe. So if we take a piece of the frontal lobe, and we try and break it down. The defining unit of the brain is what we call the neuron. And the neuron has several parts that you can see on my slide. So like if you consider this to be a tree, so these are the branches. The mauve thing you find in there is the nucleus. That is where most of the thinking or most of the integration is done. And the information is supposed to pass on to the axon terminal. And at the axon terminal, you would have this part of the nerve connecting or interfacing with another nerve. And you have all these, in the brain with in different shades and sizes. There are several ways by which this information or these nerves, these neurons connect. And it's important for us to know. So just as most of you are aware, the way we connect our circuits in the computer or even in our home, basically that's the original or the basic module by which the brain also connects one neuron to the other. So if you want an information to be dispersed from one source to the other, you need to have a divergence form of network. So it comes from the top, gets to the intersection, and then ramifies into the three neurons, which are interneurons, which are available to send the information. If you want to collect information from one particular part of the brain to the other, you can decide to use a convergence. If you want to amplify a signal, there are several ways by which these neurons connect in order to subserve the behavior, the normal behavior that we all have. And then to zoom in onto this part, which is the synapse, the nerves or the wires connects from one to the other via this important structure, which we call the synapse. So in the synapse, there are some neurotransmitters in there, which we'll be looking at pretty soon, which ensure that the integrity of the information that is received from the axon is preserved, it doesn't get tainted. So there are a lot of mechanisms, checks and balances in there to ensure that the information that is given gets to its destination. And it's a way of also amplifying signals which you receive from one point to the other. So seeing that this is a very important aspect of the brain, we want to look at those bluish circular entities that we have in the clips, and that constitutes the neurotransmitter. There are quite a number of them. There are about 1,001 neurotransmitters in the brain. The ones which have been studied that connect with suicide, serotonin. So I brought this picture back again just to reinforce the earlier assertion that that part of the brain is what is responsible for how we behave, how we, our sense of judgment and all that. And it's been found that this neurotransmitter is kind of reduced in this particular area of the brain, in the prefrontal area of the brain. A lot of research has gone on. So we are going to spend a lot more time with serotonin because that's the one that is most studied when it comes to suicide. So areas like the hypothalamus, occipital lobe, and brainstem, those are areas which connect one way or the other to mood, and they are the same areas that we have a deficit in serotonin. Aside the serotonin, there are some other entities around the nerve which are very important. As I mentioned earlier, it is the responsibility of the synapse to make sure that the signal that is received from the nucleus or from the axons are transmitted, in a very fine manner, so you don't have any compromise in the process. There's a transporter here which ensures that if there are too many too many serotonin within the clefts, they are mobbed up. Okay, so you can see that's what I'm trying to demonstrate right now. This is just a simplified form of it. You can have 1,001 of them, and they are supposed to make sure that the excess serotonin within the clefts are mobbed up. We've realized that these one also have problems in patients who have suicidal ideas. This is just another illustration to show you that this one is an oversimplified form. They are actually complex in nature. There are other studies which have looked at which areas in particular, have this abnormality. That is the reduction or compromised transporters within the brain. And it's been found in the ventromedial prefrontal area. So what I've shown is just like the medial side of what I showed earlier on. That tends to have, a reduction in serotonin transporters. I brought this one back again, that the problem is not just with the pre-synaptic phase, that's the one that has this, but also with the post-synaptic phase. So the clefts has two separate components of the neuron, the pre-synaptic and then the post-synaptic. The post-synaptic has also been realized to have issues. So receptors like 5-HT1 receptors, 5-HT2 receptors are seen to be upregulated in patients who are suicidal. And it is known that the upregulation is because they have little or relatively low amounts of these receptors. So if you have like low amounts of these receptors, even though you have all these neurotransmitters, you don't have like, adequate stimulation going forward. And again, these are in deficit within the prefrontal area where you have, your essence of life and essence of your thinking. It has also been found that 5-hydroxyindoleacetic acid, which is a metabolite of serotonin, is also very low in patients who have suicidal or violent suicidal acts. So those who have very lethal means of taking their lives. When they studied their CSF, they realized that serotonin again was also low. It is also low in, and so we are beginning to think that in order to predict suicidal behaviors in the future, maybe this is an important agent or an important chemical that we can use to assess. If it's below a certain threshold, then we can make a statement that you run a higher risk of, converting your suicidal ideas or attempts into a completed activity. It's also been studied that platelets also express 5-HT2A, and there are also studies trying to look at how we can leverage on this to estimate who is at a higher risk or not, and then institute appropriate treatments. Once we begin to think about these neurons, neurotransmitters, receptors, then we need to backtrack or work backwards to see where the problem might be from. Again, some studies have been done to look at the aspect of the gene that codes for these neurotransmitters. One of them is TP1, and this actually is one of the enzymes which is responsible for the synthesis of serotonin. And it's been found that these may also be compromised in people who have suicidal tendencies or who have suicidal ideas. And the other one is also with the transporter. It's a 5-HTTLPR. It also codes for the serotonin transporter. Remember, I mentioned earlier on that these are very instrumental in balancing the amounts of serotonin that you have within the clefts. So if you have them dysfunctional, then you may either run into problems with the levels within that, and it's been associated with vulnerability to suicidal behavior. So these are some of the alleles. Alleles are just combinations of genes that you receive either from your father or your mother. So these ones have been found to be exhibited in patients who have suicidal tendencies, and also low levels of the metabolite of suicidal of serotonin, which is 5-IA. I've already mentioned that the 5-HT-TLPR codes for the transporter. So obviously, if there are issues, you may have problems with individuals who have difficulty controlling their suicidal urges, and they may end up being very violent in their attempt. Again, on the neurogenetics, these are some compelling evidence from studies which have been done. In Sweden, 24 surviving monozygote twins, which are like identical twins. So you have one of the pair who died by suicide, and they followed the co-twin for some time, and they realized that the living victim tend to have a higher expression of the TP17, which is higher than what you find in normal controls. And I think this is not surprising to us. Those of us who have done genetic studies or who have learned about it know that monozygote twins tend to share similar alleles. So it's not surprising. So it means that there's a genetic undertone to suicidal ideations, and not just a wishful thinking or just one of the many options that an individual may have. The next one is 41 Caucasians in patients with major depression with or without the history of suicidal acts were compared. And they found that the less common TPU allele occur with greater frequency in depressed patients with suicidal attempts. Again, that lends opposed to the genetic underpinnings of suicide. And then another study looked at 101 suicide completers with the most severe methods and 129 normal. So these are people who will probably be studied in the morgue. And again, the abnormal genes were found more frequently in patients who had the suicidal ideas or who had completed suicide than the normal controls. We spoke extensively about serotonin transporter gene. Some studies where 1 year follow-up study, 1 year follow-up 103 patients were hospitalized after suicidal attempts. These patients who reattempted suicide during 1 year follow-up period and a significantly high frequency of the S allele or S genotype. So here again, even for the transporter, there are some genetic undertone. 51 Caucasians who had violent suicidal attempts and 139 controls of the same origin with a history of suicidal behavior. Again, the expressions were more than in the controls. There are others, the list goes on and on. Catechol methyltransferase also has a gene that underlines its production. This particular enzyme also cleaves serotonin within the synaptic clefts. So if you have an overactive one, obviously you may end up with reduced levels of serotonin that predisposes you to having violent, completed suicidal ideas. The next one, next after serotonin that has been studied is norepinephrine or noradrenaline. And again, there were reduced levels of receptors within the brain. The precursor to noradrenaline, tyrosine hydroxylase, has also been implicated in one study. Unfortunately for dopamine, which is one of the most studied in mental health, the relationship has not been very robust for us to make a categorical statement. However, there's a metabolite of dopamine, which is the homovanillic HVA, which has been found to be expressed more frequently in patients who have attempted suicide than those who have not. So it means that it might not be direct, but there's some relationship between dopamine, even though the evidence does not look robust, but the HVA and the CSF kind of lend some support to dopamine's involvement. The other very key and important circuit that we all are aware of is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So the brain sends signals whenever you're in tight situation or you're stressful situation. The corticotropin releasing hormone comes from the hypothalamus and then through the blood, it gets to the pituitary gland, and from the pituitary gland, ACTH is released, and that ACTH also gets into the blood and then affects your adrenals. Then your adrenals eventually release cortisol, and this cortisol cannot have a negative feedback on pituitary as well as the hypothalamus. There are some tests that we can use to verify whether this system is normal or not, and there are some differences in patients who have suicidal tendencies. The corticotropin releasing hormone levels in CSF have been reported to be increased in suicidal victims. An increased activity is always associated, with suicidal behavior. You kind of have a lot of energy and adrenaline to drive your suicidal imaginations through and through. And then elevated 24-hour urinary cortisol and 17-hydrocortisosteroid levels have also been detected in patients who have attempted suicide as compared with patients with no history of that. Coriel and Schlesser demonstrated that the hypothalamic pituitary axis hyperactivity at baseline, there's a dexamethasone suppression test associated with a 14-fold rise in the likelihood of a suicide during 15-year follow-up. So this must be a very extensive study and looking at patients who run the risk of suicide. The dexamethasone suppression test is a test that is done to kind of mimic cortisol in the system that's supposed to block the hypothalamus and pituitary sensations of cortisol in the system. However, there are some people who do not respond, and we realize that those people also run a higher risk of completing their suicide or being hospitalized for their suicidality. So Cushing syndrome is basically when you have too much cortisol in your system, and it has been associated with suicidal tendencies. So each time we are evaluating such patients, we need to put that at the back of our minds. And I guess it's because of the hyperactive HPA that they have. This must intrigue some of our physicians. It's been found that cholesterol-lowering drugs have increased tendencies to violence, accidents, and suicide. And the rationale is that most of the cell membranes are made of cholesterol. So in the brain, there are a lot of lipid layers that can be compromised if you continue to use, cholesterol-lowering drugs. And it goes both ways. I mean, if you're also not eating very well, you will not be able to build up adequate cholesterol stores to be able to maintain the integrity of your cell membranes. So the caution here is not to quit your medication, but of course, I'm sure your physicians will be in the position to advise you, or they may even ask you whether you're having suicidal tendencies whilst you're on the medication. The intent is to lower your your cholesterol, which also has its deleterious effect if it's not done. So it's just, you need to have a good mix of both. The other hormone that has been studied, can I be heard?
Yes, loud and clear, Dr. Fiat.
Okay. The other hormone that has been studied is the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. In fact, this has been known to be prevalent in the hippocampus and the prefrontal cortices. And the good news about it is that it's the only hormone that is able to initiate the process of synaptogenesis and neurogenesis within the hippocampus. And this is good news because some people may become a bit suicidal because they have reduced levels of these hormones within their brain. In fact, it's also postulated that there's a huge increase in BDNF when you stimulate a patient, either via direct current stimulation, alternating current stimulation, whichever stimulation you do. And the rationale is that it's able to reactivate dormant cells or peripotent cells, which can convert into nerve cells and start acting like normal nerves and synapses. So it's been noticed that patients who have suicide kind of have reduced levels of this particular factor in their brain. Nitric oxide is another one, and it's been found that increased levels of nitric oxide within the brain also predispose people to having suicidal attempts via the release of some cytokines 4 and 6 within the brain. Now that we've studied about these myriads of neurotransmitters which have the potential of changing things, we want to find out how would this show on, let's say, an EEG. So definitely these hormones, these neurotransmitters and hormones have ways of influencing how your brain impulses go. And it's been found that some female adolescents have got a symmetry in their alpha rhythms. Naturally, you expect more alpha rhythm on the right and the left. And there's a reversion of this when for those who have suicidal attempts. So it means that it's not just a wishful thinking again, but that there are some neurotransmitters that actually subserve these thoughts. So just a reminder of what the alpha rhythms possibly might look like. There are other studies which are done within patients who have mental health disorders. And again, some changes have been realized between those who had suicidal ideas or suicidal behaviors over individuals who did not have suicidal behaviors. Yeah, so getting to know that there are electrical stimulations or electrical changes in the brain when you have suicidal tendencies, we want to look at grossly. If these neurons come together, they form circuits. We want to see whether at the level of the circuits and neuroanatomy, there are any changes. One of the most outstanding studies that have been done is the Enigma study, STB. They've done quite a number of studies looking at brain. This study was published last year, 2022. And the target was to look at how the brain actually look at gross anatomy of the brain to see whether there were changes. So they took a sample of 577 young people with mood disorders in which suicidal behaviors were assessed with a Columbia Suicidal Severity Rating Scale, and then took another group where they were rated with other scales, but used metric to compare healthy controls with the suicidal behavior, and also looked at clinical controls with a mood disorder, but without suicidal behaviors. And so they eventually came to the same conclusion. And this was a very, it was published in Nature, so it must be a very robust study. the conclusion was that there are reduced surface areas of the frontal pole of patients who were suicidal. And this has a lot of ramifications for these individuals on the neuropsychological front, as well as the neuroanatomical or neurosecretory fronts. That aspect of the brain is the part that plays very essential in a higher order functioning, which includes our emotions, our behavior regulation, decision-making, cognitive inhibition, social cognitive, your ability to know what other people are thinking about, and then relate that to yourself. Sometimes those who are suicidal think that nobody likes them, so they have social cognitive deficits. So this was the stark, finding that they came up with, that kind of sealed the deal that there are actually things going on in people who have suicidal tendencies. And it showed that they were at a higher risk of developing that. This is a box plot to show the findings. The red one is those who didn't have attempt. They had higher mean surface areas of the frontal pole, and those who had attempted suicide had lower surface areas. Regards to the neurosecretory, it's known that the white matter in certain individuals lost or lose their structural integrity, and obviously that will affect neurotransmission in the brain. And those who had attempted suicide also had less gray in the frontal limbic systems. The frontal area that we saw is connected to the limbic system via the frontal limbic projection fibers. So there's quite a number of them that go into the thalamus, go into the stria terminalis, the hippocampus. Those are all structures of the limbic system. And they tend to be compromised in those individuals. And there's also reduced connectivity. If you compare healthy controls as opposed to individuals who have suicidal tendency, you realize that the level of connectivity, is reduced. And obviously, what happens is that it makes it difficult for those who are thinking about suicidal tendency, or those who have suicidal tendency, to think about other options, because the grade of options you have is directly proportional to the integrity and the amount of connectivity that you have between your amygdala and the frontal lobe. And there's a marked reduction in these people, and that makes them at risk. So this is just an illustration to show that the earlier part of the brain is connected to the limbic system. Now, there's also neuro alteration. When you begin to mold the idea of, dying by suicide, the brain gets into a particular phase where it undergoes changes. So for each level where you begin to think to where you begin to execute the suicidal thoughts, the brain undergoes quite a number of changes. So, and we know that those who have had suicidal thoughts don't like it. Some people don't really like it. So that one alone is a lot of stress. It's a lot of discomfort to them. So we should be mindful that it's better to treat the person, ask people if they're having the thoughts, and institute appropriate treatment, because as they continue to harbor those thoughts, the brain undergoes a lot of changes. And these are new images that show that those who are attempted suicide have, less activity than you find in the normal controls. There's also a talk about neurotheology. Basically, that is about how our belief system interface with neuroscience, and it's an emerging area. What studies have shown is that those who are religious tend to have lower risk. The recent studies that were done have also shown that the religiosity does not necessarily stop people from converting to full or completed suicide. What it does is to limit the suicidal attempts. So it's still, the jury is out there to see which one affects the other, and how religion actually affects. But what is very clear is that it reduces your tendency of attempting, but it will not be able to stop you from carrying it through. But some studies have also shown that it's able to militate against the full completed suicide. So it's an area that is still evolving. The other one is about neuroinformatics, and that's about artificial intelligence and machine learning. So artificial intelligence is basically getting a machine to act like a human being. And machine learning is basically, subset of an artificial intelligence, which is basically how you can automate a system to work for you. There's a lot that is going on in terms of data mining, gathering information about, the genetics discussions that you had earlier on, galvanic response of your skin, the tone of your voice, times when you are silent. There's a lot of data mining that is going on. And indeed, most studies have shown that there's a recent study that shows that the artificial intelligence has been able to militate against people converting from suicidal ideas to dying by suicide. Yes, so on that note, I like to say that there's enough evidence that thinking about suicide is not just an option, but there might be some genetic underpinnings, there might be some neurological underpinnings that make people behave the way they behave. They have limited options, and the earlier we initiate treatment, the better. So thank you. These are my references.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Fiagbe. It was an enlightening representation indeed, at the very least for medics and people in the health field. So please, those your friends who are not in medical field that have run away, kindly tell them to come back. Kindly tell them to come back. If you've been struggling with the medical jargon, ignore that part, but then let's break it down. The bottom line is that there is a biological basis of suicide, and like Dr. Fiagbe has rightly shown us, there are differences between people, the biology of people who attempt suicide, complete suicide, and others who don't. So this is important to consider when we make our judgments, our pronouncements, when we, pass laws, and that's why we're here today. So thank you very, very much, Dr. Fiagbe. I hope you can all hear me. Can I get feedback on my audibility?
Yes, JP, it is better now. JP, it's better.
Okay, great. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. So, again, I have the honor of introducing the next speaker. He is the immediate past chief executive of the Mental Health Authority. So we are in no small company today. As at the first time I met him, he was then the director of Accra Psychiatric Hospital, and he's a leading force in mental health in Ghana, a driving force behind the Mental Health Act, and this law that has been amended. You can't count, you really can't count many people who have done as much as he has done for mental health in Ghana, mental health law and policy in Ghana. He's a fellow of the West Africa College of Physicians, also a fellow of the Ghana College of Physicians and Surgeons, and an associate professor in psychiatry. Without further ado, I give you Professor Akwesi. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much. And I guess my video is being seen and my voice is heard loud and clear. Any feedback?
Loud and clear, Prof.
Loud and clear.
Wonderful.
Loud and clear.
Thank you very much. So I also thank you very much for this webinar and for inviting me to be part of it. When I heard of the decriminalization of suicide, I was really elated. and I've granted a lot of interviews to the media. My elation stems from the fact, and it's been well confirmed by Dr. Fiagbe's delivery, that suicide is not just somebody deciding, wishing just to die, wishing to take his life, and simply dying. There are a whole lot of issues about that. And the sum total of it is that most of them, 93 to 95%, have mental health issues. And the underlying cause of the mental health issue has just been elucidated to us all. So clearly, we just can't dismiss the fact that suicide has a biological basis, has a mental health issue, and we need to attempt to prevent people from taking their lives. And if they do not succeed in taking their lives, we don't put them in jail, but we regard them as having issues, as crying for help, as requiring support, and therefore we give the support to them. By the way, just to say, I'm not giving slides presentation. So that actually explains the base of my elation. Now, when you talk about suicide, obviously you are talking about somebody taking his life deliberately. So an act of deliberately taking one's life, that is suicide. And if he does not succeed, or if he does not complete, then we say attempted suicide. Other terms that may be used are para-suicide, but it still comes to the fact that the person attempted. And as part of the behavior associated with suicide, there are various issues. Suicidal ideation, when the thought just occurs to somebody, just once. Why don't I kill myself? That's suicidal ideation. But if the thought keeps occurring, then suicidal thoughts. And if this leads a person to decide that, oh, should I kill myself? Should I not? Why should I? Why should I not? That is suicidal contemplation. And if he moves on further to decide that now I'm firmly decided that I want to take my life, so I'm planning how to do it, whether to go for a knife or whatever. So that is suicide plan or suicidal planning. And if he moves on further from the planning to attempting it, to try it, that is suicidal attempt. And thank God if he does not succeed or if he does not complete it, then it's simply suicidal attempt. But if he does complete it, then that becomes suicide. So with all understand is for this session of mine, we just want to understand what is the situation like in our part of the world. Dr. Fiagbe gave some of the features worldwide. I'll reinforce it and then just give what the situation is like for us. So worldwide, we know that 700 to 800,000 deaths occur by suicide a year, which is about twice the number of deaths occurring through homicide, somebody killing another person. So we kill ourselves more than others kill us, twice as many times. And that is something we need to recognize that. And then that also translates to about one death every 40 seconds. So every 40 seconds, somebody takes his life. And that is something significant. We also need to recognize that, so the whole thing comes about 1.3% global deaths in 2019 from suicide. Of all the deaths that occurred, 1.3% of it globally was from suicide. And that is something really, really very serious. Typically, more males die through suicide than females, even though we also recognize that more females attempt suicide than males. Indeed, about 2 to 3 times more males die through suicide, whereas about than females. Whereas about 4 times females attempt suicide than more than men. And the reasons are obvious why in times of in spite of the fact that many people attempting, many females attempting, fewer die. Females tend to use less lethal methods that are not likely to kill somebody, like taking drug overdose, as compared with firearms shooting. So the methods women tend to use are less lethal than the methods that males tend to use. And apparently, women also As you say, suicide is a cry for help, or attempted suicide is a cry for help. Women tend to be more in need, therefore wanting to take their lives, than men. So when the man contemplates, is well thought out, well planned, and then he executes it. So these are reasons. A man may die through lethal means, like jumping over a tall building, or in front of a moving vehicle, or by hanging, or by drowning. Yeah, these are all lethal methods that one is not likely to fail when he uses these methods. And by the way, when I was talking about the suicide terminologies, let's also try to avoid the language that one has committed suicide, because committed suicide, the word commit, you commit what is wrong, what is a crime. So if you say committed suicide, we are already criminalizing the conduct. Now that the parliament has been gracious enough to decriminalize it, we should also change the language from committed suicide to simply take his life through suicide or die by suicide. That is obviously a neater approach. Now, we started by giving the epidemiology status worldwide. And let's also see what exactly it entails. Indeed, worldwide, people take their lives through more of firearms. Locally, it's not so much firearms. Firearms worldwide, and then pesticides, taking chemicals that will kill them. And whereas, or hanging or throwing themselves down, indeed, so there is, in fact, there's a bridge called Suicide Bridge, because people stand there and throw themselves into the river. Our environment here, people don't often die through suicide or by suicide through these methods. And that's an interesting phenomenon that we also need to recognize. People here die more from hanging, and that is with respect more to the males, and then from pesticides and chemicals, kerosene, bleach, and rat poison, and such approaches. Indeed, through the pesticides, that accounted for why, for some time, DDT was banned, at least in Ghana and in many parts of the world, because DDT was a common chemical that people used to take their lives. But somehow, because we thought, or people thought that the incidence of suicide through DDT had gone down, it's been unbanned, and I think that is quite unfortunate. We also need to recognize that for every completed suicide, as Dr. Fiagbe said, only 4 are reported. But even for those who, whether reported or not reported, for every case of completed suicide, about 10 would have attempted without completing. Now, for every attempted suicide, 10 would have planned without attempting, without having the courage to attempt. And for every planned suicide, 10 would have contemplated without having the courage to even plan. And so it tells us that for every incidence of suicide, we have about 1,000 people somewhere lurching around who have thought of it, who have contemplated, or who have planned and did not go further. And this is why we need to recognize, especially with the media and the language, so that if you want to prevent, it might be difficult to totally eliminate, but if you want to reduce the incidence of suicide, then you also want to avoid language and such approaches that might push people into suicide. For instance, we know what we call copycat suicide, copycat syndrome. When somebody attempts suicide or dies through suicide, and the media graphically paints the picture of how this person went through even 10,000 are there who have contemplated or thought about it, planned or attempted. And they may not have had the courage. They may not know exactly how to go about it. But one of these 1,000 people then decides that, oh, so that's a wonderful approach. So let me try that. And indeed, about 3-4 years ago, a young lady of about 11 years took her life and wrote a note that I saw another person having taken her life, and I thought that I would try that and see what would happen, just out of curiosity. Young girl, 11 years. So wrote a note and tried it. And the person saw it on the television. So the grandmother actually came out lamenting and accusing the media that you people have killed my granddaughter. That is a typical case of copycat syndrome. So we need to avoid that. The language we use is very important so that we don't give the impression that we are encouraging or we are giving people the leeway to plan it. Now, locally, the sizes we give generally are the worldwide phenomenon. Now, locally, an NGO about 6-7 years ago did a study and found that 1,500 people take their lives every year. 1,500 people die through suicide every year. And that comes to roughly about a 1 in 5, 1 in 5 days, 4 or 5 days every year. That's quite a lot. But as huge as it is, a suicide atlas, World Global Suicide Atlas, also puts Ghana in the bracket of 15.28 deaths per 100,000, which is one of the highest. Well, not exactly the highest, but it's still quite high. 15.8 deaths per 100,000. And that also comes about 4,898 deaths in a year, more than the 1,500 that the NGO got. Now, that is significant. That is significant. We need to recognize that this is an issue that we need to see how best we can prevent it. Generally, Ghana, compared with other areas, an area like South Korea, deaths per 100,000, much higher. But we cannot compare ourselves with those countries. We need to see how we can reduce ours. And that's very important. Indeed, Ghana Health Service in 2022 has got the first quarter suicidal attempts as 470 suicidal attempts per the first quarter. But let's understand that this is grossly underreported. There are many suicidal attempts that do not get to the hospital, especially if they don't use any attempt that will lead to a health hazard, immediate health hazard. If the person takes a rat poison and becomes unconscious, he is likely to be rushed to the hospital. So it will go into their data. But if he uses a method that probably knocks him down a short while and he gets up, the people may not take him to the hospital, and so it may not go into the records. That is one. The other thing is that our records so far don't even include suicide or attempted suicide as a cause of death. Remotely, yes, remotely we may have it as a cause of death. But in terms of the pathology and counting the mortality, we may miss it. So we tend to miss suicidal attempts and suicides in our records. So the 427, what I'm saying is that the 470 that Ghana Health Service got should be regarded as gross underreportage and not the figures that we may need to look at. Because otherwise we deceive ourselves and think that, well, there isn't much of a big deal. We also need to recognize that the pattern of suicide that we see in the country has changed. In the past, if you have somebody had taken his life, then the person was in his 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Indeed, globally, above 60 is the highest rate where people take their lives. And under 14, the minimum. 20, 39, quite low. What we are seeing now is that there is a certain reversal of the pattern. Instead of somebody being 50, 60, 70, when the person takes his life, and that one was largely because the person looked back towards the end of his or her life, looked back in disappointment and said, oh, I think I'm a failure. I should have done this, I should have done that. And then that person goes into depression and eventually takes his life. But the pattern is changing quite significantly these days. And the change is that, for instance, we are seeing more of 20 to 35 people taking their lives. 20 to 35 people, and these are students or fresh graduates. And among the reasons why they take their lives are interesting: job or graduate unemployment. The person has completed schooling, 4 or 5 years, no employment, and decides that I can no longer depend on my parents, and decides to take his life. Somebody, a student, decides that my school results, my performance is quite poor, and I'm a disappointment to my parents. I can't continue to humiliate myself and humiliate my parents. So he decides to take his life. Somebody, a student, game betting, and these are all real cases we are seeing, game betting. I'm a student, I've used all my money, in fact, my school fees, to enter game betting with the hope that I win and then I can pay back, and then I don't. Game betting, leading to addiction, a betting addiction. And that is also leading to a lot of deaths among students. Rarely would you see people, well, not really, I mean, it does not happen often that above 35, then they want to take their lives. Indeed, I myself, my phone is online for suicide help. And in some 8 months period that I decided to take count of the suicides, the attempted suicides, or the call for help that I was getting, within 8 months, I had 150 calls. Now remember, these are people who go to the net for help, and then they find it. So the 150 were largely between 20 and 35. Some are as young as 11 years, some are as old as 53, but largely between 20 and 35. And these are students, these are the computer literate people, so they can go to the net and find whatever answer they want to get. So we should not take this number to be a complete picture, because there are others who will not go to the net to seek help, and therefore they will not get to this. But of the 800 within, of the 150 within the last eight months, that is significant, because as I said, that is a particular group of people who can have access to the net and they can go for help. And a lot of them were students, a few graduates who are not getting employment, a few still married people who, out of frustration in their marriage, they want to take their lives. A few were also relationship problems. My boyfriend, my girlfriend has divorced me or has jilted me, and I feel frustrated. My world has come to an end. These are real issues. Amongst the very young ones, the under 20s, a girl decides that my parents don't want me to move with a boy, and so I want to take my life. I am too chubby, too plumpy, and my mates are laughing at me that I'm obese, and out of that, I want to take my life. And these are real issues. Somebody thinks he's too thin, and again, he's a target of friends, and so he wants to take his life. There's another significant thing: cyberbullying. Cyberbullying. Social media these days is a helper killer. It does help because it does enable us to get news and instant news. So it does help in a lot of ways. But the flip side is that it becomes a means for people to bully others. So people taunt and haunt others. And Ghana in particular, our social media is used to insult people, especially celebrities, politicians, people who are popularly known. Then they are taunted, they are insulted. Somebody makes a statement, others don't agree, and that he becomes a target of bullying, cyberbullying. And if somebody cannot withstand that, then he decides that, then let me take my life. And there are quite a few cases of celebrities confessing that they've gone to a point where, out of the bullies, out of the insults, they really wanted to take their lives. And this is something we need to recognize, because it becomes an issue as cyberbullying as one of the issues precipitating wanting to take one's life. Then I talked about the pattern in terms of age, which is now changed. There's another pattern in terms of gender distribution. I said earlier that globally, more males take their lives than females, in the proportion of about 2 to 3 times males to females, but more females, about 4 times as many, well attempted than males. But there's a certain reversal in terms of the completed suicides here. What we are seeing is a balance, male to male, it's about 1 to 1. And that is significant. So why are more women taking their lives, completing the suicide attempt, completing the suicide than in the past? And that is something we need to investigate. But in terms of the proportion that attempted, is still about 4 to 1. More females attempted than males. But the fact that they completed is something that we need to recognize and need to find out. But of course, we know that among the reasons why people take their lives, indeed, as I mentioned earlier, 93 to 95% of people take their lives through mental health issues. Either there was a pre-existing mental health problem, or at the point of attempting, or at the point of the suicide, there was an acute stress reaction, which is still a mental health issue, but there was no pre-existing mental health problem. And this tends to make people think that a good number of people take their lives when they didn't have mental issues. Correct, they didn't have a pre-existing mental issue, but at the point of taking their lives, there was an acute stress reaction. And things that could have pushed them into acute stress reaction. Somebody is a trader and encounters a loss. The capital is lost overnight and decides that, no, I can't stand this. Where am I going to get capital to replenish, where am I going to get funds to capitalize my trade? Then he goes through acute stress reaction. He decides that the way out for me is to take my life. This is not a pre-existing mental health problem, but a mental health issue arising acutely out of the phenomenon the person went into. Somebody has run into a debt, let's say a government worker, and then suddenly finds himself as having run into a debt, and then auditors are after him. Within a day or two, the person decides to take his life. This is not a pre-existing mental health issue, but at the point of his taking his life, it was an acute stress reaction. That is still a mental health issue. So these and many others. So they all constitute about 93 to 95% mental health issues, and about 80 to 85% of them are depression. And various factors that push people into depression: economic crisis, socioeconomic crisis, economic downturn that we are experiencing, job loss, object loss, the person has lost a dear one through death, or a dear one has left this person. All this push people into depression and eventually mental health, attempted suicide. And these are things we need to recognize. The other thing I also want to mention, I talked about a pattern that is changing, the pattern in terms of age, in terms of the gender, and in terms of the method also is very significant. In the past, as I said, for males, it was more by hanging or by firearms. For females, more by chemicals, pesticides. Now that DDT was banned, the pattern has changed, because we're beginning to see deaths by suicide from DDT very, very low, or chemicals generally very, very low. But now drug overdose becomes a reason for people attempting to take their lives. So sleeping tablets, if somebody takes a whole handful of it and swallows, if it's not lucky enough to be rescued in good time, such a person could die. So drug overdose from some of these chemicals, somebody to me even simply just a paracetamol. This may eventually not kill you, but it's a para-suicide, attempted suicide. So we recognize that. Now, the other thing I also want to mention is that the time of suicide or suicidal attempt, we see a lot of it in the night from 11, at least from the 150 people calls that I was getting, between 11 a.m. and 11 p.m., sorry, and 2 a.m. Apparently, that was a time that on their own, they decide that what is life got for me. So they have the opportunity to contemplate. In the daytime, it's going to work, no time to think about this. By the nighttime, 11 to 2 a.m., that is when, up to 3 a.m., that is when they think a lot about this. So the time pattern is also significant. In fact, of the 150, just about 2 or 3, well, about 5 of them actually called in the daytime, but most of them in the nighttime. Sometimes as many as 5 calls per night. And these are really something significant. We need to recognize that. So on the whole, I want to say that yes, people take their lives or attempt to take their lives for various reasons. The pattern as we knew it in the past is changing, and we need to appreciate it. More is now counterbalanced, more equal males and females taking their lives as against more males in the past than females, but still more females attempting than males. The pattern is changing in terms of age. In the past, you heard of somebody attempting suicide or taking his life, then he was 50, 60, 70. Now, younger age group, 20 to 35, and that's something very significant. A few will go to 40, 53, but most of them in the students and just completed schooling bracket. The reasons why people are taking their lives is also changing. We are now getting more job unemployment, school dropout, cyberbullying. These are reasons, as against in the past when cyberbullying, of course, wouldn't be an issue because internet was not available. So the change and the pattern is something we need to recognize. And we need to factor that one in our attempt at reducing suicidal attempts, in our attempts at prevention, which I'm sure Dr. Osenchi will talk more about that. But we need to recognize this change in pattern. If you do that, you will be doing ourselves a lot of good. But the last point I want to say is that when the issue of the decriminalization came up, the social media was awash, ridiculing us that, oh, now you are talking about freedom to die, freedom to die. So if anybody wants to die, he can go ahead and die. We are not saying that. It's not freedom to die. And that's why I like the theme, overall theme of the program, decriminalization. Is it a freedom to die or freedom to live? It is freedom to live, for people to recognize that if you feel like dying, there is an issue. So let's address it. And once you address it, and you are happy. Because frankly, for all those who attempt to take their lives, if you save them, almost invariably, they are all grateful that they didn't die or we were not allowed to die, except that still a good number becomes a reason. In fact, prior suicide attempts becomes a good reason for another person to attempt. So yes, somebody attempts, we are able to save him, he's happy, but then that also becomes a reason for him to want to attempt it. So let's know these factors and let's recognize the change in pattern. And that is where I end my presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, Prof. Thank you
so
very much,
much,
Dr.
Prof.
JP. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that enlightening presentation. I'm very sure that we learned a lot, and a few of the highlights that struck me with that suicide is not a white man's problem. It's not an Asian problem. It's a global problem, and it's rife in Ghana as well. And it's something that we definitely need to address, and that's what all the work that has been going on behind the scenes has been to do. And suicide risk, varies depending on the stage in which a person is. The person may be nursing the idea but have no plan. They may have a plan, or they may just have the intent to do it, or they may actually act on it. And then if thankfully they survive, these people are at even, greater risk than the average person to attempt again, regardless of whether they are punished or not. And that's why it's important to address this. And the media and people in general have to be mindful of the way we report and talk about suicide. Now it's been decriminalized, so we don't say commit anymore, because you only commit crimes or sins. And how you present it is very important. It's important when, to the media people who might be here, when you talk about suicide, when you report on suicide, you don't glorify it, you don't, make it look too appealing for other people to do. And of course, you provide resources. And thankfully now on social media in a lot of places, including Ghana, when you Google, it may be rerouted. When you Google ways to end your life, it may be rerouted to, resources that could help you deal with those suicidal thoughts. Very, very, very important. And now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker. And before we do that, let's kindly note that you can post your questions to any of the speakers in the chat. And then after all the speakers are done, then we'll take them up. You can either send them to me directly or just post them in the chat, but then try to tag me as well so that I'll be sure to see it and read it to the speakers. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce you to our next speaker. This is in the person of Dr. Ruth Osu-Entry. She's a senior lecturer at the Department of Behavioral Sciences, School of Medicine and Dentistry, KNUST. She's also the head of psychiatry at Confanochi Teaching Hospital and the indefatigable president of the Psychiatric Association of Ghana. She's also an international psychiatrist, a 2019 fellow of the Association of Women Psychiatrists, what she got in San Francisco. So I'd like to welcome my boss, Dr. Ruth Osu-Entry, to tell us more about suicide prevention in Ghana and how decriminalization helps, and much more. Thank you very much. Dr. Osu-Entry, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, JP, for your kind introduction. I am not a senior lecturer yet, officially, a lecturer, but I'm grateful for your kind introduction. I'm struggling sharing my slides from my end, so I've asked one of you to share it for me. I see that it's just being shared. Thank you. So this year, this March comes across as history for those of us in the mental health fraternity. We are super excited that this law has been passed. The law about criminalizing suicide attempt has been repealed. I'm sure that the fight started way before I even got into mental health. I'm told that it's been more than a decade since this fight to decriminalize attempted suicide started. Thank God that we are alive to have witnessed it. But then again, why is this helpful to us? How does the decriminalization of suicide attempt help us as a nation, as a people? This will be the outline of my presentation. Now, so for us to understand where this law came from and why it's repealing helps us as a nation, as mental health professionals, and even as a people, we must understand where the law came from. From some little investigations I did, this criminalizing attempted suicide stems from the English common law. And some parts of the law explains that as a human being, we don't own ourselves. We belong to a supreme God. It is a God somewhere that brought us to this earth. And so we have no right to take our lives ourselves. And since we all do not see God, the law believes that the state represents God. And so invariably, we belong to our individual states. And so if you take your life, you are taking your life without the permission of the state, and the state must punish you for that. And some of the punishment at the initial stage was not to grant you burial grounds once you are reportedly you are reported to have died from suicide. In fact, the body of the deceased who died by suicide was believed to still receive some punishment by sticking a rod in the chest of such an individual to the ground, or sometimes hanging the body on a pole in the middle of town, just for everybody to see that this person has done what was illegal and what was unacceptable. And so largely suicide was considered as a crime in England, which under which Ghana was initially colonized until 1961, when some of these things started changing. As the law evolved, people start looking at how the law can be eased. And so the law further evolved from not punishing the dead person, but punishing those who survived an attempted suicide. And gradually, that crime for attempting to take your own life was classified as a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor is a low-level crime, but it's punishable by fine or by a brief jail sentence. Over the years, the Suicide Act that was passed in the UK decriminalized suicide attempts, and it was as a result of the advice that was given by the British Medical Association to rather see attempters of suicide as people who may have serious mental conditions, and as such, they should be recommended to rather seek psychiatric assistance and attention. And from that time till now, a new meaning of suicide has been given, or suicide attempt has been given in several countries. We see that in countries such as New Zealand, in countries like Hong Kong, Ireland, Sri Lanka, Singapore, they have all decriminalized attempted suicide. And thank God that when we count the statistics of countries that have decriminalized suicide, Ghana will be stated to 2023. The current legal status of suicide around the world, according to WHO's 2014 report, says that over the past 50 years, a lot more countries have decriminalized attempted suicide. There was a recent study that was published in BMC in 2022 that tried to compare 20 countries that had decriminalized suicide against 20 countries that were still punishing or were still seeing suicide attempt as a criminal offense. And they compared how suicide rates have fared in those countries. Majority of those countries, and I'll show some of the statistics, including Ghana, showed that the global suicide rate was always lower in those countries. The global suicide rate was, compared to the suicide rate in that country, was lower. It means that those countries that were yet to decriminalize suicide attempt had suicide rate higher than the global suicide rate. And we see in the graph I have showed, I'm not sure whether it's very clear. If you can put it in the slide mode, probably it will help. We see the blue line showing the in-country suicide rate, and then the orange line showing the global rate. And we see that in Ghana, for instance, up to this data was up to 2019, our in-country suicide rate was way higher than the global suicide rate. More on the Ghana picture, there's a lot of negative attitude towards people who attempt suicide, including their families. We see that suicide attempt is highly condemnatory. That is why, as a country, we had a law. Can you kindly move the slide? As a country, we had a law that condemns and criminalizes suicide attempt. Then we also tend to silence suicide attempt. And so we hush it. If we know that this person's death was by suicide, it is least talked about. People talk it behind other people's back. It is a crime. It is sometimes trivialized, and people go about saying, hey, I hear that person that died was by suicide. Oh, I hear Mami Mansa's son's death was by suicide. So we sometimes trivialize it and talk about it, gossip about it. And some of these things have been known to be the key cultural negative attitudes about suicide in Ghana. More on the suicide picture in Ghana, that there are basically 3 levels at which these negative attitudes or stigmas stemmed from the family or community, from religious groups, and then from the law. And we realize that now we would have only 2 to deal with, as opposed to the initial 3 levels of stigma that seem to be promoting suicide. Now that the law is out, we are hoping that, and we are praying that suicide rates will go down. Indeed, as has been shown in literature, decriminalization of suicide has shown a lot of decrease in suicide rates across the country, across the world. In Ghana, the criminal code, which was stated in section 57, subsection 2 of the Criminal and Other Offences Act 1960, said that a person who attempts to commit suicide commits a misdemeanor. This is repealed. Why did people think that it's important at all to criminalize suicide? And I have put that into 2 main categories. My slides are not moving from my end. Am I the only one? Host, can you kindly move the slide?
Yeah, I'm trying to resolve it. I'll share for you soon.
Okay.
And then put it in slide mode. Yeah, slide mode, showing mode.
Joel, please, are you the one sharing?
Dr. Fiagbe is trying to work on it.
Okay. Let me send probably an easier version to Dela.
No. So, Joel, this current version, who is sharing, you or Dr. Fiagbe?
I will carry on.
I'm sharing. Are we okay? So is this slide okay, or where, or here?
Well, kindly stop sharing so that I come in.
So, Joel.
Okay.
I have gone past the slide. Dr. Fiagbe, I've sent you a PowerPoint version. I don't know whether that helps. Right, so I'll carry on whilst that is sorted out. So people have given reasons why they thought suicide should be criminalized. I'm on slide 10, please. The several reasons, I have grouped them into 2 broad reasons. It says that suicide attempt should be criminalized to serve as a deterrent, because suicide in itself scares people. If you go and meet someone in their room hanging on a rope, that is scary. So you are causing a panic to people, and that alone is something that should not be encouraged. And so punishing people who scare other people that way was seen to serve as a deterrent. And then that people do not have the right to take their life because their lives belong to the state, was also one of the reasons why suicide attempts was promoted to be criminalized or was seen to be a criminal offense. But then why are people, especially the mental health fraternity, also saying that we should decriminalize suicide attempts? Several reasons, but key ones among those reasons are that criminal punishments previously applied to attempted suicide rather have an ironic effect that encourages
Oh,
Looks like we've lost.
I'm trying to draw your
Dr.
attention.
Osentry temporarily.
Yeah, so
Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
yes,
Please
we
continue.
can hear.
So I was describing how the criminal punishments ironically rather encourage persons who had suicidal tendencies to use lethal methods to ensure that they do not fail the attempt. The second reason was that suicide is actually pathological, and in the earlier submissions by my co-presenters, Dr. Fiagbe and Prof. Kwesi Osei, have elaborated on this fact that people who die by suicide usually have ongoing untreated mental illnesses. Marsh, in his study and in his book in 2010, stated that suicide is pathological and people who kill themselves have untreated mental illnesses. And other studies, it stated that major investigations up to date shows 90 to 95% of people who died by suicide had a diagnosable psychiatric illness. And this was by Jamison in 1999. Another one published in 2005 said that approximately 95% of people who died by suicide experienced a mental disorder at the time of death. There was another review of 31 study that involved 15,629 cases of suicide cases, and it reported that out of those numbers, 98% had an ICD or DSM-defined mental disorder, and this was published in 2006. And then lastly, another study that was published by Nock et al. In 2008 said that the presence of a psychiatric disorder is among the most consistently reported risk factor for suicide behavior. And this was shown from psychological autopsy studies that revealed that 90 to 95% of people who die by suicide had a diagnosable psychiatric disorder at the time of suicide. And so if somebody had a mental disorder, an illness, recognizable by ICD-10 or DSM diagnostic manual, why should the person receive any punishment? If you compare it with any other person suffering from any part of the body, if someone has say diabetes, and for one reason or the other, they forgot or they deliberately did not take their medication, or they are just non-compliant with their treatment, and they report to the accident and emergency in hypoglycemia, it will be considered as an emergency. Everyone will run helter-skelter to bring them back to life, and they'll be encouraged to get help. They'll be encouraged to comply with their treatment. Unfortunately, that is not so with suicide. When people are going through mental health challenges, the 90 to 98% of those who die by suicide, who survive a suicide attempt, who unfortunately were battling with a mental problem at the time of their attempt, are also punished for trying to take their life instead of giving help. So when we decriminalize suicide, does it help globally? Yes. On the global scene, a lot of studies have been done to show that decriminalizing suicide attempt has been found to decrease overall suicide rate. And the main reason being that individuals who are at risk of suicide will be more willing to seek help from the community and from mental health professionals, therefore enabling early intervention for preventing suicide. Overall, global suicide rates appear to be declining, and this is primarily as a result of decline in suicide in lower and middle income countries, for example, China and India. What's happening is that China does not criminalize attempted suicide, while India decriminalized attempted suicide in 2017. And over the period, the suicide rate in China declined from 14.9 in 2000 to 6.7 in 2019. And this is a whooping 15.0% decrease. Similarly, the suicide rate in India declined from 19.1 to 12.9 during the same period. And this is a decrease in suicide rates of 32.5%. At the global scene, the average suicide rate has declined from 14.0 to 9.0 in the same period, which totals a decrease of 33.7. And this is enough proof that when we decriminalize suicide attempt, it would globally reduce suicide rates for us. As Ghana, can this help? Can decriminalizing suicide help at all? We see from the literature that I have shared that in other countries, when they decriminalize suicide attempts, their suicide rates reduced. And as a result, WHO is reporting that decriminalizing suicide is now a major target in preventing or intervention in suicide rates. And in the 2014 WHO report, it stated that there has been decline in suicide rates after decriminalization in many countries over the past 50 years. And there has also been increases in reporting of suicide, which has helped in prevention planning. For the healthcare as a whole in Ghana, now that we have decriminalized suicide, from what is being shown in the literature, evidence-based medicine is telling us that we are going to see a decline in suicide rates. Secondly, there will be increase in reporting of suicide attempts, which will help us in prevention planning. Again, this decriminalization of suicide for Ghana is going to encourage suicidal persons to report suicidal crisis early enough so that they get help. Again, for us in Ghana, this would prevent underreporting, which in turn promotes accurate estimations that could guide planning for suicide prevention. Also, decriminalizing suicide attempt means that as a people, we are being sensitive to the plight of suicide survivors and their family, since majority of survivors may be dealing with untreated mental disorders. And lastly, decriminalization of attempted suicide will encourage government to commit funds for suicide research. What are the action points for us? This is freedom to live and not freedom to die. Decriminalizing suicide attempt does not mean legalizing suicide attempt. Some of us have thought that now that the crime aspect has been taken off, then we have legalized suicide attempt. No, it is rather a freedom to choose to live. The government has done its part. What can we do as a society? We still have ongoing part to play in our bid to eradicate suicide from the country. And these are some of the things we can do. We can all act by recognizing suicide warning signs and seeking help early. And some of the warning signs I have shared here are that when people start active suicidal thinking and verbalizing, it is a warning sign. When people keep saying that I am tired with life is not worth living, let us not take them for granted. Let us quickly assist them to get help. Can you kindly move the slide? The second common warning sign is expressions of hopelessness and depression when people openly verbalize that they are tired of this life or they feel depressed, they feel life is not worth living, we should take it seriously. When we see people exhibiting sudden recklessness, impulsivity, and dramatic mood changes, someone who does not know how to take in alcohol, or someone who is an occasional alcohol drinker, suddenly goes to binge drink and comes back boozed, it should raise a red flag that could be a warning sign. Persistent anxiety and agitation has been found to be a warning sign. Expressions of feeling trapped is also a warning sign. More warning signs: expressions of no reasons for living, no purpose in life. Increased alcohol or substance abuse is also a warning sign. Giving prize gift or setting house in order. And I know someone who died recently from suicide when he had set his house in order, and unfortunately, because the family members had no idea that this was a suicide warning sign, nothing was done about it. This young man went to his mother and said, "Mom, this is 1 year school fees for my daughter. I have a land in so and so place. These are my land papers. These are my bank details and my bank pin. I just want you to keep them for me." And nobody thought that was weird, or nobody thought that was unusual. And the person left the parents' house. The next morning, he was found to have killed himself in his home. Speaking in metaphors about traveling to a remote or unreachable place has been found to be a suicide warning. When somebody you know does not even have a passport keeps saying that very soon I'll be traveling to an unknown land and I may not come back, it should raise your eyebrow, and it should it should be of concern for you to explore more. When people withdraw from friends and become unexcited about life, you may be on a social media platform with an old schoolmate, and it could be Facebook group page, WhatsApp group page, and on all the pages, Akosia left, Akosia left, Akosia left, and you're sitting in your house thinking that probably Akosia has become too known, or is just anti-so. Maybe Akosia is exiting life and beginning to exit all social media platforms. Rather reach out to that person, and instead of assuming, inquire whether everything is all right with them. And then lastly, acquisition of common items for suicide like rope, gun, poison in individuals who have recently changed in their outlook should also be a strong warning sign for us. Action point for the person who may be suicidal. You may be in this webinar and you joined only because you are actively having suicidal ideas. There is help for you. Understand that those feelings you are experiencing will not last. Move away from any dangerous weapons that may tempt you to use them to end your life. Let someone stay with you all the time. And most importantly, seek help. It is not a criminal offense to seek help. It is not a criminal offense to tell somebody that you are thinking about suicide. Now, when you seek help, life will be made available to you because help is available. In conclusion, some have feared that decriminalizing suicide attempts may increase the suicide rate, since there will no longer be any legal deterrent. Well, this assumption has been refuted in literature. What we must fear is that there is a worse outcome in criminalizing suicide attempts, as this encourage people to use more lethal methods to end their lives, instead of surviving the suicide attempt to face imprisonment or to have to go through court processes. Official suicide rates have been found to have increased slightly in some countries soon after decriminalizing suicide attempt. But in the literature, this was attributed to a previously lower rates or a previous underreporting because of the criminal nature of the attempt. In the long run, decriminalizing suicide decreases overall suicide rates because then individuals who are at risk of suicide will be more willing to seek help from the community and from mental health professionals, thereby enabling early intervention for preventing suicidality. Thank you very much for your attention, and these are my references.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Swinky, for that wonderful presentation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure that everybody else did. One important thing that I'd like to touch on again is, what trivialization, stigmatization, and criminalization does to the idea of suicide and people who have attempted suicide, right? It makes it something so taboo, and people don't want to talk about it. People don't want to report it. And then as a result, something that's swept under the rug, and we think it's not a problem, but in fact it is. And like Doc has rightly said, even if after this decriminalization has been done, you start hearing more reports of suicide and suicide rates increasing, as the media can like to sensationalize things. Don't be swayed, because it's just people being bold enough to report, people being bold enough to talk about it now that it's been decriminalized. And you and I and everyone else has a role to play in reducing the burden of suicide in Ghana and globally, to be honest. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce the next speaker. This is in the person of Favor Brown, who is she's a chemical engineer and a counseling psychologist, and she's going to do us the honor of giving us a live account of the effects of suicide, live accounts from a suicide survivor, and how this previous criminal law can affect somebody who is going through suicidal ideations and has even attempted suicide. So I'd like to give the floor now to Favor. If you're on, kindly take over. I hope she's been unmuted. Favor, do we have you on?
Favor, please unmute yourself.
Let me see. Let me see if she's still on. Oh, looks like we've lost her. Let's see.
Yeah, we just lost Favor briefly. I'm sure we're trying to get her back.
I think she's been having connectivity problems. Maybe this is doom period in her area. Okay, in the meantime, right, let's have your questions. I'm sure that there are burning, okay, I'm readmitting Favor. But in the meantime, please send your questions or post your questions in the chats. I will copy them, take note of them, and if Favor is back on, she can carry on. If not, we'll just have the speakers who are with us try to address the questions that we may have at this point. I do not see any right now. Oh, I see one. Okay. In the meantime, let's take this question from Dr. Cornelia Sari, or from Cornelia Sari. Will decriminalization lead to an increase in suicide attempts? I think that's something that Dr. Rosenchi just addressed.
Hello.
Oh, Favor is on. Great. So Cornelia, we'll get back to your question.
This is Favor
right
Brown.
after Favor.
Am I on?
Yes, Favor, you're on. Kindly continue, or kindly start your submission. Thank you very much for joining.
Hello.
Yeah, Favor, can you hear
I
me?
can hear you.
Oh, I can see and hear you clearly. Can anyone else hear me?
Hello.
Maluk or Joel, if you can hear me, please give me feedback.
Yeah, we can hear you, JP.
Favor, we can
Okay.
hear
can
you
hear
now. Favor, we can hear
All right.
you and we can see you.
I can barely hear a thing, but
We can hear you clearly, so just go ahead.
okay, let me go ahead. My name is Favor Brown. As you all may know me already. I have survived suicide somewhere 2010. I had a marital breakdown that made me become suicidal. I was then in Ghana. So when I got suicidal, I took a chemical. I took specifically Parazone, and then I was rushed to the hospital. So when I was treated for the Parazone, I was discharged. And unfortunately, I was not given any form of psychological or counseling therapy. I don't know, possibly, maybe the nurses at the time did not understand what exactly was wrong with me. They just treated the physical substance that I had taken, but my mental situation was still the same. So when I got home, then according to my husband at the time, who is now my ex, he said he felt that if I died, they would come after him. He would be questioned. So, and he also knew that, suicide is a crime. So he went to the police, Ashaman police station specifically, to make a report. So I was about a week after the incident, I was physically okay. So I resumed work. At the time, I was working with Tama Oil Refinery. So while at work, I got a call from the reception that they had some policemen there, and then they wanted to come for me because they had a warrant for my arrest at the Ashaman police station. So I came downstairs and I went to the reception. Apparently, I was shocked because I didn't know what I've done. I asked them, are they sure it is me they are looking for? Then they said, yes, it's me. So I said, what for? And the usual thing is, okay, our commander asked us to bring you. When we get to the station, you would be told what exactly the problem is, but just cooperate and come with us. So I obliged, and then I went with them. So when we got to the station, I met their commander, who was a very great man, a very good man. He was quite aged, so I called him Daddy. Then he was like, yeah, you are my daughter. So he took me to his office. Apparently, he didn't make me write any statements. He took me to the office. Then he told me that there's a gentleman came there, apparently my ex, and made a report that I had made an attempt on my life. And so that is why they came to pick me up. And I said, yeah, I had been going through problems in the relationship for quite some time. And so I felt that apparently this was my first ever relationship. We started somewhere, I was 18 years at the time. And this happened after like 5 years into the whole thing. So I actually did not understand relationship issues. And I felt that this was a gentleman I started life with. So I didn't want the problems that we've been having all this while. So that led me to feel that, if it was not working, then, life was not worth it. That's why I tried to end it all. So he told me that, okay, but do I know that it is a crime in Ghana? I was shocked. I was like, no, I don't know. As a matter of fact, at the time, I had not read about suicide. I had not read about depression. I didn't have much knowledge. I had heard severally on radio or TV that, okay, someone had committed suicide. I had seen people with mental problems, but I did not, have the right knowledge about what exactly was happening to me myself. And unfortunately, when I was discharged, I was not given any psychologist to tell me that this was your problem. So I was confused at the police station. I was like, I'm having a problem. I feel I'm not well. And so if I'm not well, why would you want to worsen my situation by telling me that I'm committing a crime instead of helping me? So the commander was like, yeah, that is why I decided to bring you to the office. If I'm to go strictly by my procedure, I should have made you write your statement and tell me what exactly what happened. Then we can, process you for court. So I started thanking him because I felt that, okay, he was rather being nice to me. Then he said he would want to rather introduce me to someone who he knows who has done some form of counseling. And that was the DOFSU head at the Ashaman branch, one lady, Christine. So he said he wants to rather introduce me to Christine because he believes that Christine would help me overcome whatever challenges I was facing in the relationship, and then also see how best he can intervene to solve the situation. And then he also said that from then he would want to always check on me if that is fine with me, so that he can be of help to see how we can both find a solution to whatever I was going through. So I was a bit relieved. Then he took me to Christine's office, and then he told him what exactly the problem was, and she was also very helpful. From then she gave me her number, told me to call her anytime I had a problem, and then she would take care of me. So the commander told me that because of the fact that there's a complaint, he would also have to go through certain procedures to make sure that at least he did his best. Because if I end up dying, then they would say that when they made a complaint, he did not take any action. So he would be coming to the house, or if I want to be coming to, so that at least he can also believe that something is going on or he's taking some action. So I agreed. So from time to time, when I close from work, I would just call him. If he's there, I would pass by. Then he also would come home sometimes and then try to ask me what exactly is happening and all that. All this while that this was going on, I still had the suicidal ideation, because sometimes when I'm driving, and I'm missing a bigger car, I still felt that, okay, if, I only tried it and they have, reported me, that means that the next time I have to make sure that I succeed so that I don't even get arrested, because the commander will feel that I have let him down and they may even not report me to him. So I have to make sure I use a sure means of death. Fortunately for me, I got a friend who invited me over to the US for holidays. That was in 2010, December. This whole thing started somewhere October, November. And then I got invited in December to the US. When I got there, she helped me get psychotherapy. And that transformed me completely. So I came back after 3 months. I came back somewhere February 2011. So when I got back, then I decided that because the therapy had made me realize that no, it was just a phase of life I was going through. And so I didn't have to end it all. And I could make things better by changing the way I looked at the situation. So when I got back, I decided that, okay, if this is what I went through and I ended up getting help and I did not die, then how do I help others who are in similar situations, also live and not die? Because I then realized, okay, then suicide is preventable and it is just a mental health situation. I started to read about it. I started to try to learn. Then fortunately, I got Gifty Auntie, and I told her I would like to come to your program and I want to talk about my story, just to encourage others that no matter what you are going through in life, or if you have a mental health challenge, with the right treatment or the right professional help, you will definitely, and you can always get better and move on with life. You don't have to die. So thankfully, when I got in touch with Gifty Auntie, she linked me up with Dr. Dodoy, Dr. Eugene Dodoy. Then me, myself, Dr. Eugene Dodoy, and Gifty, I think, and another person, we took part in that TV program. Then after that, Dr. Dodoy became my friend and personal, help. Since then, anytime I have any challenges, I would get in touch with Dr. Dodoy, and then he would also, give me help. And so gradually, through Dr. Dodoy, I got a link with the this in the Department of Mental Health at Legon, Dr. Safo, who is now Professor Safo, then Professor Akotia. They all welcomed me. Then I got in touch also with Professor Akwesi, who is now a mentor. Then Madame Tankam from the US. I got in touch with all of them through my advocacy. And since then, my life has been mental health, because I realized that we had the professionals in the system who were ready to help. And so the ideation that I was having, sometimes at the time I could be on a story building and then I just felt like, why not jump? But because they kept, we have this platform, we keep discussing issues about mental health and suicide and how we can push for decriminalization. So when Dr. Kwesi, for instance, when they heard that I had gone through that, it's like with suicide in Ghana, I have gone through the process from beginning to the end. Because when you're suicidal, you're supposed to end up at the police station, you're supposed to be prosecuted. So my prosecution only got truncated by the commander. I should have actually served a jail term. So I always say that it's like my story narrates everything that is supposed to happen to a person who has suicidal ideation in Ghana. And I love to share it because anytime I did a TV program, I realized that people call and they have issues that, can be dealt with, issues that are like mine. They were just having a mental, breakdown. And so if they are given the right medication, they are given the right professional help, they are given the right attention, definitely they can overcome it, just like I did. And that is what my whole life has become. It is all about mental health advocacy. So last week, when I heard about the fact that Ghana has decriminalized suicide, I was like, oh my God, because I've always said that when suicide is decriminalized in Ghana, I'm going to organize a party because that would be my second birthday. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm currently in Canada, I'm not in Ghana. So that party has to be held when I return. But I think my second birthday has been born. And I want to thank all the professionals from Professor Kwesi and all those who have helped to get this law. And then also, I remember I had to go with Prof to see Honorable Minority Leader at the time, Haruna Idrisu, and he was very instrumental. And then I got another papa from there, one of the MPs who lost his daughter through suicide. He also became very helpful, and always I call him, and then he was like, okay, you are my daughter now, but if you try that thing again, I'm gonna cane you. So I just want to say that I am maybe the most excited, if I can say that, about the decriminalization of attempted suicide in Ghana, because I believe that it would be of great help to people who are suicidal. Imagine the fact that at the time, I didn't even know it was a law or it was criminal to, to commit it, but I was still suicidal. So I think that the law was not a deterrent. No, when you are suicidal, it's like you are sick. So being threatened that, oh, I would take you to jail, it doesn't deter the person. Because for me, even that report made my situation worse, because I felt that, this was something that was so personal and private, and I didn't even want people to get to know. But here I am being, called to the police station. I've never had any criminal report, but my co-workers, the receptionist was asking me, what exactly is the problem? Why are the police here for you? And, I had to end up, saying all that, had happened. And they were all shocked because they also didn't know that it was a criminal offense to commit suicide in Ghana. So I just want to thank Parliament. I know it's been a long haul, over 10 years of putting pressure, sometimes we even got tired because I was giving up. I remember over somewhere in December, Professor was saying on the platform, oh, early this year, hopefully we would hear good news. So I started counting the days. In January, every day I wake up hoping to hear that this law has been decriminalized. And all thanks to God and all who put our hands on deck to ensure that this is done. This is rather freedom for people who are suicidal. It is not freedom to die. It is freedom to live and then become the best you. Because having suicidal ideation is not the end. It is probably, for me, my addiction was the beginning of uncovering who exactly I was as a person. It made me realize I was stronger than whatever challenges that I face in life. And all that I needed to do was to have a positive mind about situations in life. And since then, I have saved several lives that, have become friends, have become a family, have become people that, they call me and they are like, okay, because of you, I also did it. I remember very well one particular incident that kept inspiring me so much was one TV program I had on TV3. I gave my phone number. After the program, a gentleman called me and he was like, Madam, my yam bottles, ekutame. Say, let me just switch to tree. A can say, me saw me TV no. Me saw TV no, na me who say what is so I will say. Also, wafa, ya obi mua, nanka obe kuhu. But as time as some will client, as time cransha, what the Maya say, when he say you won't know. The bottles look running. Then he took a picture of the bottles he had, already milled into powder and was ready to drink and die. And together, as he was saying it, I was weeping and he was weeping because, apparently it reminded me of my own situation. And he threw everything away and decided that he was not going to die again. I'm shedding tears of joy today, even as I narrate this, because I feel that it is victory for people who have mental health challenges. It is victory for anyone who has had a family member who is suicidal. And it is also victory for anybody who has passion for people with mental health. And for me, it is the best thing that has ever happened to me as a Ghanaian, that suicide attempt has been decriminalized. And people can freely seek for help. They will not be ashamed again. They will not be judged by people who do not understand what mental health is or what mental illness is. They would no longer have that burden of, not knowing what the next thing will be. They will be ready to seek for help. They will run to professionals
sometimes when people are even suicidal, when you go to them, they are not ready to speak out because they feel that even telling you is going to lead them to jail, because they got to know, because we started advocating for decriminalization of this law. So they tell you that, Madam, and that make people die in silence because I need help. If you cannot help me, why put me to jail? If you cannot help me in the situation that I am in, why would you want to put me in jail? I am so grateful. My tears are tears of joy. I am excited. I'm just, so excited. I am overwhelmed actually by this decriminalization. And if I was in Ghana today, I was going to walk from Tema to Parliament to thank them that they kept their word. They listened to professionals like Prof and Co, who told them the truth. Being a suicidal person or having suicidal ideation is not out of wickedness. It's not out of being a bad person. No, it's just a situation. Just imagine me 10 years ago and look at me today. So you would have just put me in jail for like 5 years. People are serving jail terms. And I am hoping that all those people will be released. It put me in jail and you would have worsened my situation, because at the time, the situation I was in, I probably would have ended it there. I would have surely found a way of ending it because it would have worsened my situation. But when I got the needed help, when Dr. Dodoy and Co came around, when Dixie Auntie lent me a helping hand, became a friend to somebody that, who needed help, I became a better person. Today, I am much, much better. I am currently pursuing a mental health program over here through the help of Professor Kwesi. He was very instrumental in giving me a letter to that effect. And I am thankful to him. I would come back and then do much more for Ghana. Thank you very much for having me, and I'll be ready to answer any questions. I hope I've not gone beyond my time. Emotions made me overwhelmed. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm thankful to everyone who has been instrumental to my mental health story. I am so, so grateful to all of you. God bless you. God bless you. And thank you, Parliament, again, for decriminalizing suicide in Ghana. It is for mental health patients. It is for people with suicidal ideation to seek for help and not to die. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Favor. It's been really touching and empowering to hear your story. Thank you for sharing these intimate details of your life and your struggle and your success with us. We're grateful to have had you on this show. And we're grateful for all that you've done to improve mental health in Ghana. I mean, it's one thing to get to that point and, get the help you need eventually anyway, and then stop there. But you've taken many steps forward and you've joined the fight to improve mental health in Ghana. So that's very, very commendable. And I wish you all the best in your endeavors. So very briefly, thanks to one of our listeners who prompted us, we're sharing the National Suicide Prevention Helplines. So if you look at if you look at your screen, I'm sharing the national. Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
I can hear. Hello.
Yeah, JP, we can hear you.
You are loud and clear.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah. So I'm sharing the National Suicide Prevention Helpline. So please take note of it. This is going to be my, I'm going to leave this up for some time so that we can copy these numbers. Okay. And I have, before we go to the announcements, some of the questions that have been typed in, thank you very much for sharing those. Some of them have been addressed. So if your question has been addressed, kindly pay attention to it. Prof and some of the other speakers have been addressing them. But then if you have any burning question that has not yet been touched on, kindly raise your hand and then we will ask you to unmute and speak. But before we go on to that, I have a great announcement to make. We'll be having, almost as has become tradition with us, we'll be having part 2 of this webinar. And the MPs who sponsored the bill to decriminalize suicide in Ghana will be on together with other key speakers. So please tell someone to tell someone. Wherever you got word of this webinar from, please follow whoever that is or whatever platform that is religiously. And we will be disseminating the links to the next webinar very soon. And that will be a week from today. So, questions? Okay, I see a hand raised.
JP, there's
Just a
a
second.
question, and Dr. Adipa is there. Dr. Adipa.
Okay, Doc, please unmute, give your submission and then lower your hand.
Good afternoon. Please, I would like to request that the suicide helplines, the way it is, if you can kindly place it on a common platform that we can pick and share, I'll be very glad. A lot of us are active on many social media handles. And if that, can be shared so that we can, spread the news on such social media platforms, I'll be very happy. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Adapo. Duly noted. And we have Nana here. Nana, kindly unmute, ask your question, and then kindly lower your hand.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I have had some concerns regarding the whole idea of the decriminalization, and I would like to put them forth so that I can take advantage of the expertise around us to help address them. Dr. Ruth Osu, and she gave some reasons why some people were not for the decriminalization. Of the 2 reasons she gave, it was people saying life came from God and people may not take their lives. And the second was for the idea of deterring. My reason against decriminalization is, however, not any of these 2. My reason why I thought the criminalization would serve some good purposes was so that it will be a vehicle to help champion the treatment and management that people with such suicidal ideations and attempts try to do. And I will explain that briefly. So by this, I was seeing the entire prosecutorial system as actually a vehicle to help with their management. And I'll be referring to aspects of Fever's story and what happened. That far from it being the negative, it was rather positive and contributed to her eventual life saving. Indeed, if a person is attempting to, the idea that it was a criminal offense means the involvement of the state and the police can be triggered. By our law and our jurisprudence, if a person is picked up and there are indications of a mental health condition, there are indications that the person may not be very sound, especially at the time of attempting or committing the crime. It's not about sending them straight to court for them to be jailed. No, because I have heard that over and over, that when you are having this condition, instead of them getting you help, they are going to jail you. No. When that is established, they are first sent to the hospital or the medical centers for evaluation and then treatment instituted. Indeed, that was exactly what the police commander who attended to Favor tried to do. And that has been the advocacy we are doing. It emanates out of the McNaughton rules, where Daniel McNaughton shot somebody and he said he thought it was the Prime Minister of Britain. So the defense was that at the time he did that, he didn't know what he was doing. He was not of a sound mind. And from that year, that was in the 1840s, the rules have been that when you pick a person has signals of a mental health issue, you address that. So when the police commander had Favor, instead of the statements, instead of sending him to jail, instead of keeping him in the cells, instead of asking for bail, he rather chose to refer her to where she could get help. So we thought that this whole law, instead of decriminalizing, taking it entirely out of our criminal code, we should rather reform it such that when people are reported to be attempting to commit suicide, the police should move in as an ally to we the health professionals so that they can get the person and process the person for the nearest health center, provide even the appropriate security if needed, so that we protect the person from himself or herself. In fact, in Favor's case, because it are not, the police did not even act fast, she was left on her own. The husband did not report to a health facility or a mental health professional. And that is what appears to be going to happen now that it has been decriminalized. It means if I see somebody attempting, I am not under an obligation to report or call the police. And the police may not necessarily have to respond because the person is not committing a crime. And thirdly, the person may choose to either seek for help or not because they are on their own. Treatment, even when life-saving, is not compulsory and cannot be imposed on an adult who refuses it. But then, if it was still a crime, then under the cloak of the law, the prosecutorial system, the law enforcement agencies will move in with all the civil appearance. They don't have to be brutal. They don't have to come in their machine holding guns, etc. Like those who have managed to do. Those who come in plain clothes, they talk nicely to our patients. They take them, they counsel them, they joke with them, and then they help them through the counseling process. So I was seeing the whole idea of decriminalization as a mere vehicle. In fact, down in the question,
Nana, kindly wrap up your submission. Thank you very much.
I'll wrap up briefly. I have put a question there asking, when was the last time somebody was prosecuted in Ghana as having attempted committing suicide? In fact, the current deputy speaker of parliament said in his 35 years of practice of law, nobody has been prosecuted that way. And indeed, I will challenge Favor, for instance, to let us know the details of who is still serving jail term in present-day Ghana for attempted suicide. It's not. So I think we've missed an opportunity to have made the police an ally. If you look at our mental health, and I'll end on that note, our Mental Health Act, there's an aspect where you can call that's for involuntary and voluntary detention of people. And all of that, the involvement of the police is there. And they will come in a very civil mode to ensure that civility is done, they are not haunted, they are not intimidated, but just to see to it that they get their treatment. So this is the aspect of the law, the aspect of this whole thing that I thought we've missed. Then somebody will say, if they are going to be treated, then why do we still keep it as a crime? Because in all the submissions made today, none of them said 100% all attempted suicide cases have a clinical illness. There is a certain percentage of people who attempt suicide who are not clinically ill. Some have different motives, some can be harmful. So that little 5%, 10% of those people, this law is for them. So that those when upon evaluation are not sick, they can then go through the normal procedural system of that law. And that's my little concern regarding this. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much for your submission. I would like to announce to those who will be coming after to please keep your questions, submissions to 2 minutes. Because if not, I mean, this is a very, very touchy topic and we can spend the next 5 hours here if we are not careful. So I would like a prof, one of the panelists, to address Nana's submissions. I don't know if we still have Prof with us. And I think this really ties into the legalization versus decriminalization distinction. Thank you, Prof. Over to you.
Yes, I'm around. And thanks, Nana, for your question. Actually, I've answered a bit of it. The direct question about the distinction between criminalization and decriminalization and then legalization. Now, the point is that what is not written in law cannot be enforced unless you imply what is not stated in black and white that this is a law, then you are allowing people to imply. So if you say that it is the law should remain as a criminal offense, but then the police can then use their discretion to take persons to the hospital. They are not mandated to use their discretion. Once the law says that once you've attempted suicide, it's an offense. It's an offense. The policeman takes you and straight away he can go to court. Admittedly, some of them use their discretion to understand that this person was ill and they take you to the hospital. Now, I've given you the example of about a year ago, one student at Ejisoman Student School. In fact, there were two students who went to steal some school items, and the assistant headmaster caught them and put it was over a weekend. So he put the two at the storeroom and locked them up so that on Monday he would deal with them. And whilst there, one of the students thought it was an embarrassment for his parents to learn that he has stolen some items. So he took some chemicals, bleach, paraffin, and whatnot, and swallowed in an attempt to take his life. Now, when the policemen came in, they charged the two of them all right, but the one who did not attempt suicide, he was charged for stealing, and the one who attempted suicide was charged for attempting stealing. Sorry, for attempting suicide. And he was actually jailed. So that's about a year ago. I also know personally of one Kwadwo Abebio about 10, 12 years ago, Kwadwo Abebio of Obuase, who attempted to hang himself, and he was found and rescued, and he was taken to the police station and was jailed for 3 months. So when the deputy speaker said that he had not in his life, 35 years, not seen, I told him that that was not true. Indeed, when we went to parliament, but of course, if he says he had not seen, he has not seen. It does not mean it's not true, but he has not noticed. But it's been there, and I have given you 2 instances. In fact, there was a 3rd instance, I don't remember. But Professor Osafo actually cataloged about 15 cases. 15 cases. So it's never true that nobody has been prosecuted on attempted suicide. Now, the point is that the law as it was, as I said, took away any discretion or just allowed the police to use their discretion, but they are not mandated. So once somebody attempts suicide, just send him to the police station. But what the law says now is not to encourage people to take their lives, but just to remove the cap or the code that attempted suicide is a crime. And then we are saying categorically that if somebody has a attempt suicide, he probably has a mental issue. The law actually says categorically he has, but eventually the person will be brought to the mental health expert to assess. And if you assess and you don't have a mental health issue, then of course it will be different. You go advise the court that this person does not have a mental health issue. If he has, then we treat him. So it is better now than it used to be, and there is no doubt about it. And Dr. Usiantri has given categorical statements, pieces of evidence to show that in countries where there is being decriminalized, the rate has gone low. What further evidence do you want? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you very, very much for that. I mean, even I, in the few years as a practicing psychiatrist, have seen people incarcerated for suicide and for suicide attempts. And the evidence is there. If we just said that, 1 in 10, for every one completed suicide, there are about 10 people or more who are thinking about it or planning, right? If I'm thinking about it and I'm planning and I know that I could be arrested or I could be prosecuted for even having these thoughts or acting on these thoughts, I'll be very, 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 unwilling to share this with anybody. And, that puts me at a disadvantage because it prevents me from getting the help that I need. So very, very important rebuttal to that. Thank you very much.
I just want to add a note. Hello? Yeah, so in his questioning, he alluded to the fact that about 98% of people who die by suicide have a mental illness, and it's a 2%. And I think that what the literature is pulling for these 2% is that when they've been followed up, they realize that they had some technical issues with their brain. So the question is, why do they choose dying by suicide as an option? So these are things which have been investigated, and they've noted that there are some predispositions to that. So even those 2% in time will be covered.
Thank you very much for that addition. Dolph Sutherland, can you please unmute yourself, make your submission and lower your hand? Okay, seems like we do not have Dolph Sutherland with us right now. We have Felicia Enyunam Eku. Felicia,
hello.
could you please
Hello. Can you hear me?
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Dolph speaking.
Okay, Dolph. Felicia, please hold on for Dolph to ask his question and make his submission, and then after.
Attempted suicide is largely underreported in our communities. And I believe that now we have huge numbers of community mental health nurses. And it has to be linked to the CHIP system so that rumors of attempted suicide should be investigated. Once we have huge numbers coming up, we may be able to design our own local.
Thank you very much, Dolph. Felicia, please go ahead. Felicia, are you with us?
Hello. 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 Hello.
Yes, Felicia, we can hear you.
Good evening. Good evening.
Yes,
everyone.
Felicia, we can hear you.
Please, my question.
Good evening.
My question is to Prof. I want to find out from Prof if there is any plans between the Mental Health Authority and Ghana Education Service where there can be advocacy in our schools. I'm asking this because I'm a teacher and I have cases before me where students come before me and then they tell me that they want to commit suicide. And when you go into the cases that they bring, it's about their sense of belongingness, where there is broken home. Others don't know their parents and they are with their auntie, the way they treat them. And they feel like they don't belong here. So they want to commit suicide and all that. So I want to ask Prof, if there will be a collaboration between the Mental Health Authority and Ghana Education Service where they can go into the schools, because this bracket is the adolescent group where they feel like, okay, they are with people where they don't love them and they want to end it all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Felicia. Prof, over to you.
Yes, thank you. Already there is a collaboration between the health system and the school health program SHIP. However, this law, the decriminalization, now opens a whole lot of avenues to tighten the collaboration. So yes, there will be a collaboration between the Mental Health Authority and Ghana Education Service, particularly with SHIP, so that such individuals can be identified very early. We are also thinking of establishing employee assistance program. So this employee assistance program will be both in schools, at workplaces, various organizations, where anybody going through some stress or traumatic experience or any such situation could be identified very early and given the support. So the collaboration will certainly be there, and other agencies to the place and whatnot. So this opportunity opens a whole lot of avenues for it.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. We have Dr. Jemima Kankam. Thank you for joining us, Doc. Please unmute and make your submission.
Hi. Actually, what I want to say first is I'm glad that I'm in this program. Great presenters, great questions. What I want to add to the person who questioned the value of decriminalization is that the original code, legal code, where we inherited, had nothing to do with helping those who felt that there was a need to end their lives. It was for punishment. And we should not forget that it was not to help. So it's either we're going to find our own code, but this code was not to help. The other thing about if you see someone who is trying to end their lives, most people, even though I'm in the US, it's no different. Most people who attempt, it's usually private. It's not like most people, you see them jump, you see them shooting themselves. They come to treatment and some of them tell you I see people in their 30s, 40s, they attempted when they were in their 20s, when they were in high school, okay? And nobody knew, not even their parents. So what this law is doing is to encourage people to tell. And like Prof and others have said, we're going to collaborate. There'll be a lot of education, public education, like it's being done now, so people can get help. The other thing is, think about the discrimination. If someone has hypertension, doesn't take their medication, and has a stroke, you don't go to the police first and say the police then will then find them someone. It's directly medical. So why do we need a middle person, the police? So those are the three things. Habits always overtake logic. So this habit has been there in terms of what people think. And when I read some of the comments, yes, this is saying you now have license to kill yourself. No, most people want to live. The human being is made to live. But as Favor said, sometimes some things happen and that mindset changes. And the goal is to have help to change the mindset back to the will to live. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very, very much, Doc. Thank you.
Well, John, can I add one more thing?
Yes, please, Prof.
Dr. Kandam, thank you very much. You are welcome for being here. Now, on the issue, I think Nana made a point too that now that it has been decriminalized, if the policeman sees anybody attempting suicide, he is helpless, he cannot come in. I want to say the police are not there only to handle crimes. They are also there to ensure peace. So if somebody falls sick and we want help to take him to the hospital, we can invite the police. It is not a crime, it's part of their responsibility. Already we are collaborating with them. Somebody has a mental health crisis, we can invite the police for the police to support us to take the person to the hospital. So in the same way, somebody attempts suicide and we want to handle him, we can invite the police to help us to take him to the hospital. So the difference here is now that now the police come in and they take him to the hospital as against the first time when the police came in and he was taking him to court. So that's a very important difference. Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification, Prof. Isaac Bolu, sorry if I haven't pronounced your name properly. Kindly unmute and then ask a question and make your submission.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I just two submissions. One is just an add-on to a question from someone from the Ghana Education Service who said if it could be extended to the schools. I am a mental health nurse myself, working in one of the communities here in Accra, and I would say that for the school visitation, we are really doing that to ensure that we educate them on mental health issues, including the suicide. So it's still ongoing, but just that I think that we have to expand it or intensify the education all around as far as mental health issues are concerned. And then also all of us who are mental health advocates, I want to encourage us that we should try our best to keep on educating the public because most of them are still ignorant about mental health issues. And the next one is just a quick one to Prof. I think I saw his response to that, but it's disappeared. I can't see it on my screen. It's about the scenario he gave where a mother tried to accuse a media house of teaching the daughter the way to commit suicide. I want to know if it is wrong in public education, like we always do in the TV or the radio stations. Is it wrong to mention the means by which people will commit suicide? Because our aim is to educate. I think that it is right to still mention the means by which they can commit it, but it doesn't mean that we are rather teaching them to go and commit suicide, because it is one of the misconceptions that talking about suicide may give someone the idea. So I want Prof to humbly respond to that for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Prof.
Yes, you are right. And my response was that, yes, you can mention the mode of the suicide, but it is the graphic, detailed description that should be avoided. So for instance, he cut his finger, he's cut his rib, and then the graphic description, as sometimes you see in the media, or you use the rope, the graphic description, those ones should be avoided, but simply mention the mood. That one, I don't think there's anything wrong. It's part of the education, you're right. And I'm adding to the point that, yes, when we mention suicidal attempt, it does not necessarily encourage people to take suicide. However, in the same breath, let me say that the graphic description gives the opportunity for copycat syndrome. And that's why we must avoid a graphic description.
All right, thank you very much, Prof. The last speaker, was it Nicholas Danso, or has he already spoken? Nicholas Danso.
Thank you for the opportunity. My question is, will it be wrong if the authority or your noble office would push it in the school curriculum? I say this because I am a member of Favor Foundation, and I'm trying to remind her that she saved a client with only 100 cedis because the client was owing. And she passed it through me for the client to get the help. And realized, was it 2 years ago, the client called and asked of her. And I was also looking for Madam Favor because her foundation is not in working now. That is what I'll put it. But I would want to ask Prof, as a CMHO, won't it be proper if they decentralize it to the point that CMHOs will have quite extensive knowledge on it to educate the public? Because I also had a case with a student who happens to live with her auntie, and out of frustrations and out of abuse, I would say, took in these pesticides. And when she came to the facility in Takoradi, my immediate boss was like, I'm calling the police because this is a criminal issue. And I was trying to educate her. Before I could say Jack, the police was in. But I try using my little knowledge I have to educate them, and upon that, now the client is doing very well. So will it be proper if they inculcate it in our school and even teach in public places? Thank you.
Thank you. Prof, I don't know if we're overburdening Prof this evening.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I can.
Okay.
You see,
All right.
as I said, we are already in collaboration with SHIP. The challenge with SHIP is that already their own curriculum is, well, they tell us, overloaded. So it becomes a little difficult for you to provide for them to incorporate a new item in the curriculum. So invariably, often what they tell us that it should be an extracurricular program. So that's where the SHIP is. But I agree that with this opportunity, we will then be enabled to go in and discuss with them further so that we probably can see that it has to be incorporated. That is what. Now, the other thing is that now that this decriminalization has been effected, we have the challenge of putting in place systematic procedure and measure of embarking on massive public education, which will trigger down to all levels. So yes, you will definitely come to the CMHOs and share with them the education so that they will be empowered to give the public education. Now, this example of yours highlights the point of saying that once the law was there before the decriminalization, anybody seeing suicide, even a professional, health professional, will simply say, or attempted suicide will simply say, let's report to the police. But now, if this same person is aware of the law, his attitude will be different. He will say, how do we ensure that we've given the health support that he requires? So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, like someone said, we have to end at some point. I would advise anyone else with a question to post it in the chat and or join our next webinar. I'm going to allow one more person to make their submission. I have Beatrice Jumfor Williams here. Beatrice, kindly unmute and lower your hand. Beatrice, okay. Looks like
Right.
Beatrice isn't ready.
I'm unmuted now. So it's just to support what Professor Kwesi said. The WHO has issued guidelines for reporting suicide. So there's guidelines for reporting suicide in the print and in the all sorts of press, even on social media. And we noticed that we flout it. You're not supposed to indicate the person's name, the video, but sometimes we see the camera will be taken to the people's houses and their family who are already traumatized are being asked questions. So there are guidelines for this. The most recent update is the 2017 and it's available on Google. I would urge all of us to go and look it up so that we are abreast and we also increase our suicide literacy as mental health professionals and even as other professionals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Beatrice. I am going to share. Okay, I think someone's already sharing their screen. Great. I've just posted also in the chats the PAG details, the Psychiatric Association of Ghana details. So please kindly visit the website or contact us on the number that you see on your screen, and then we'll give you further information on upcoming webinars on suicide and dealing with it in general. But then to wrap up today, I'm going to have Dr. Ruth Osuentwi give closing remarks. The president of the PAG is going to wrap up, and then let's have her now, please. Dr. Ruth Osuentwi.
Thank you, JP. Thank you so much for so excellently moderating this all-important webinar for us. And I want to personally thank our speakers, our very learned facilitators for accepting our request to be on this webinar. And I thank you, our participants, for joining us. This decriminalization of attempted suicide would probably not change much if we all don't join forces, don't join hands in educating people on what it means for us as a people, how we can go about it, how we can recognize suicide, where we can get help and all that. And so the Psychiatric Association of Ghana has put together a very informative webinar series that is going to run for a couple of weeks from now onwards. And so next week, same time, meet us. We'll share the links, our flyers on our various social media platforms, and let's share some information, some more information on how we can bring suicide rates down to zero. Probably Ghana will be the first country. And if we can do that, it will take you, it will take me, it will take each one of us here. Thank you very much for spending part of your Sunday afternoon with us. God bless us all. Bye for now.
All right, guys. Thank you once again. And our president has brought us to the end of our program. So hopefully see you next week. And then someone is asking how they